Hi everybody, it's Annette from the Art of Intuition, and today we are outside again. It's definitely nice sunny today, so I'm gonna have to probably lighten these up in post. There's not a lot of light out here. We're gonna talk about victim energy today. I actually shot this video last week, and when I got in, the video wasn't there. So I just spent all that time shooting it, and then it wasn't there, which is kind of funny. Which kind of led to the point of victim energy. When those things happen, they trigger victim energy. So we can always look at what's happening around us to trigger us feeling like a victim. Another thing that will do that is injuries. If we get injured, that triggers victim energy. It also gets the distortions in that area of the body to start to come out. So when you injure a certain part of your body, you're going to start seeing the release of different emotions that are trapped. And some might actually say trauma. I really don't like the word trauma because trauma kind of feels like something was done to us intentionally. To me, it has like a negative. It's a very human consciousness word, trauma. And human consciousness, we use it a lot to kind of blame. There's a victim energy there, the trauma, all that type of stuff. So, but anything that was done to the body, it was done over time, stored in our DNA across all of our lifetimes. So when we talk about ascension and we talk about consciousness, we're not just talking about one lifetime. We're talking about all of our concurrently happening lifetimes. We don't have that linear progression that we think we would have. It's all happening at the same time. So when we go to clear karma and we go to clear, which I'm going to actually talk about karma, I think, in a different video. So I don't want to get too much into that now. I want to shoot another one about karma because I feel like it's time to kind of update some thoughts on that. But victim energy is going to start to purge from the body when we feel like something happens to us. So a lot of times we set these things up in our experiences so we can see how much victim energy gets triggered. Like when I did the whole video the other day and it wasn't there, the phone had cut out, and I thought I was like, oh, that's okay, I'll still have the part I did and I'll just cut it there. It wasn't that big of a deal, but the whole thing was not there. The whole thing was gone. But I really didn't get too upset about it. I was like, it doesn't matter. I guess I needed to kind of find and maybe another way to explain it, to see how I kind of felt about the victim energy again, and look at everything that happens around us to try to clear victim energy. And that's going to be super, super important right now, because you see that working through all the collectives. You always see, when you get into the human consciousness, you see the human consciousness is always going to want someone to be the hero and someone to be the villain. It's always it's a big blame game. That's what human consciousness is. It plays in a blame game. And if we're still playing in the blame game and you're doing that, whether you're doing it consciously or not, currently there's a lot of things going on in the world where people are standing up for things that they feel are not just. So they're conscious choices to say no more to certain things, but they're still coming from unconscious programming. They're coming from an unconscious place, so they're not, is it the highest of the highest timeline and the highest of the highest consciousness? No, but it's a step in that direction, because at least now we're standing up to saying that's not okay anymore. That's not okay. Even though you're running a program around why you're doing it, there's still a story around why you're doing it. There's a story around the victim energy of what's going on. But human conscious always wants to do that. Anytime you listen to anything and there's a human consciousness involved, there's always a someone's right, someone's wrong. And then we go around the wheel, the whole victim wheel, and it kind of reminds me of that sort of the, what is it, in that Game of Thrones, they would say break the wheel. That was the big thing in the original Game of Thrones series. They were going to break the wheel because it was kind of the same thing. It didn't really matter who was on top, who was doing this. It was just constantly, it was going to be a constantly pitting against one another. And that also brings up a lot of victim energy of what one section of a population did to the other. You even see it going back into different, what a human consciousness would call historical times, because they still react in a very linear way. They're going to go back and see, all these things that were done hundreds of years ago. In their consciousness, it was hundreds of years ago, because they still see it as linear time, to clear more victim energy from the body. So anytime we get into victim mentality, we are technically clearing victim energy. Now we can clear victim energy consciously, which is why a lot of these situations come up so we can clear victim energy. Or we can do it unconsciously, where we actually kind of take on the role of the victim. So that's kind of the difference I want to get across there. You could take on the role of being the victim, or you can clear victim energy. And when you say those two phrases, you can feel the difference in them. You can feel the weight of them and how different they are when you're clearing victim energy and when you're playing the role of the victim. Because when you play the role of the victim, you don't know any better. You believe the story you've told yourself. You believe the story of what happened, the unjust that was done. And if you're clearing victim energy, you can feel that you feel like a victim. You feel like you're a victim to that, a victim to that. But you also understand you're clearing victim energy. So I'll usually stomp around for a bit and get it out of my body, because it is always important to get out of our body. We can't suppress that stuff in. Things happen in our life to bring all this stuff up. That's why things happen. That's the only reason why we create things to happen. We would never create things to happen if they didn't have a purpose. And the purpose of things happening is that we can look at things and say, okay, that's not okay. That wasn't an okay thing. And to also go back and look at the victim energy that was there, clear the victim energy, and then go back and reassess the situation. We can't enter back into the reality when we're still carrying any story around the reality. If it's still triggered, and that to me means if you're triggered. If you're triggered, you still have a story around the reality, you're not ready to enter back into the reality yet. As humans, we want to go back in right away. We want to get the last word. We want to go back in to try to fix it. We want to go back in to convince someone else of what we think is right. We don't want to exit the reality in silence. Anyone operating from a human consciousness, and at some point all of us were, or we might dip in and out of it depending on where you are in your ascension journey, your ascension of consciousness journey, but it's kind of funny to when we want to go back in right away. We want to re-enter our reality right away, even if it was reality where we felt like we were completely a victim to that reality. We want to go back in immediately and say, no, wait a minute, let me explain why I'm a victim. Let me explain the whole thing again. And part of that is the human ego, human conscious ego, it wants to be heard. There's always a part of it that wants to be heard. There's always a part of it that wants to just someone to hear it. So you have to kind of assess your role when you're around people that are playing out victim energy, whether they're playing out the role of the victim or just want to release victim energy. A lot of times I'll just kind of say, I just want to release victim energy right now. I know it's a story. I'm not a victim. I created the whole experience. Now, we can also sometimes go back, but we can only do that from up, top down. We can only go back when we're in a different consciousness and look back at different situations we created and see how we created it. We can see how we started it, in a sense. We gave our power away. We didn't take ownership of what was ours to do. We want to kind of put that on someone else and say, oh, and now it's wrong, because we wanted someone else to blame. We didn't want to take responsibility. And when you get to certain levels, and levels not as hierarchy, levels is just kind of to explain it. When we get to different levels of our consciousness, we see that we created it all. And if we give our power away and we allow other people, sorry, I thought I heard noise. Noise in the woods. It's like, oh, it is Halloween. When we give our power away, when we create a story around it, that's when we want to go back and kind of reprogram the story. We've done a lot of videos about rewriting the story and changing the story. And every time you change the story, upgrade the story a little bit, change it a little bit until you eventually get to where there's no story. You don't have a story around it. It doesn't really matter. You do the highest aligned thing you can do in the moment. And is it the highest of the highest? It might not be. You might not be in a consciousness yet to see that, but it's the highest aligned thing you can see to do in that moment. And sometimes that's what we do until we can get to the next moment, and where we can see something else that would have been higher aligned to do. But in that first moment, we couldn't see it because we didn't have the consciousness to see it yet. We didn't have the consciousness to anchor that in yet. We were still trying to do other things. And when we're going through this process, a lot of this process is doing a lot of other stuff at the same time. We're clearing one thing. We're, anchoring in something else. We're finishing up one DNA upgrade, we're starting another one. Everything's kind of happening at the same time. We're in a doing phase of one new reality. We're in the being phase of another reality. Everything kind of bleeds over. And we talk a lot about having the doing and then having the being and then the doing. You know, the first year is kind of integrating in the new codes, the new light codes, and then doing whatever it is you see to do maybe the next year. But we kind of have to set with the consciousness that first year, and then the second year we embody in the consciousness, and then we have to start doing something. You cannot embody unless you're doing something. You can hold the conscious, but if you don't actually ever do anything with the consciousness, you're not embodying the consciousness. You're just trying to hold it. But if you don't actually start realigning your life, you're not really embodying in anything. Because when you start realigning your human life, you start understanding from a different space that nothing was aligned. And the whole thing has to go. And we don't really like the whole thing has to go. And I see a lot of people trying to get out of the whole thing has to go. And saying, I can keep this, or I can keep this, or I can kind of makeshift this or makeshift that to make it fit. And it doesn't work that way. Trust me, from someone who tried it, it doesn't work that way. You can't keep one thing because you just don't want to let it go. You don't want the entanglements of it. And that's when we start clearing more victim energy. We start clearing more victim energy when we get to we don't want to have to let that go. Then we become kind of a victim of the ascension process, which there's a big part of ascension is kind of being a victim to it, because it feels like it's kind of nonstop, especially when you get into a lot of the deeper soul work, when you start getting into having to realign things and being the sole responsibility of your reality. You get into God consciousness, where we're responsible. No one else is responsible but us, and there's no one else to look to. There's no one else to say, oh, if only. There is no if only. There's just, what are we going to do right now to align this in its highest possible place without playing in the muck? And that's kind of where it can get. We kind of learn as we go, and I'll say we get a lot of practice realities along the way. Your universe is going to kind of throw you a softball. See if you can align this. Can you stand up for yourself here? Can you stand in your power here from a place of love? And there is a way to do that without standing in our power from a place of anger. There's a lot of difference there. We can stand in our power because we have so much inner power. We don't have to have a show of it in a sense, but we can stand up for ourselves. A lot of people think because you're in certain spaces in your consciousness that everything is going to let everything fly in a sense. And we let a lot fly for a while. One, we don't have the energy to align it. We don't have the consciousness to align it. We just can't really deal with all the stuff we created. And two, because we do give other people in our realities a lot of chances to come from honor and respect and integrity on the soul level. And if they can't do that repeatedly, then we will have to stand up. I know I was presented with a lot of when I closed out my last reality, a lot of situations where I had to finally stand up and say something, because it got so disrespectful and so ridiculous at the end that I had to just say, okay, I'm done. But there was a lot of reason why it happened that way, because I hadn't been doing that. I was kind of becoming a little bit of a victim to it, using that situation to clear victim energy. And then I got to the point where I'd realized how I'd created the whole thing by not wanting to stand up to begin with, by feeling like the other people involved in the reality were more important. And we go through a lot of that too, because we have the hierarchy of who else is in the reality, making sure everybody else is okay, but we're the one kind of holding up all the reality. We also see we can see a lot of weight gain when we do a lot of that type of stuff, and we're holding up the reality because we're kind of putting the weight of the whole thing on us, because we're trying to keep it going. And one thing you will see it repeatedly when you're aligning realities, you're working through a lot of this stuff, the minute you take your consciousness, your energy out of a karmic human reality, it'll fade away quicker than anything, because they're not built in anything to last. There's a perception that they're more safe, and they're not. That is a complete fallacy. They are not safer than our other realities. They are completely not that way. They're completely unsafe in a sense, because they're not built in anything. The minute you take your energy out of it, it'll collapse almost immediately. You'll be shocked at how fast it'll turn, how fast someone operating from a human consciousness will turn, the minute you stop participating or carrying the reality and letting a lot of stuff slide. And we have to look at the story around why we're letting a lot of stuff slide. So I'm going to end this before I get too far over 15 minutes. Okay, keep practicing the art of intuition.